Okay, so hi everybody. I just thought I'd start off by telling you a bit about my experience of doing this research storytelling, which was really just a mini project or activity I did when I was working at the University of Sheffield. What it was that we had a bit of money to work with a professional storyteller. And I was mostly working with PhD students and postdocs to craft stories about their research for a public audience. So this was a festival of social sciences that takes place every year when they have public events for the general public. So it's to make research accessible to the general public. So the purpose of our exercise was to craft these stories about our research in a way that would be of interest or say something to the general public. So I think it's just worth saying that was what the audience was. And in our case, although you've seen they were videoed, which I'm unsure it was really worthwhile doing that, they were actually prepared for this public performance. So we prepared to perform them, if you like, no editing, no script to read from, just doing a performance. So there's a collection of the stories there on the website, and I think you've hopefully seen one of them by Itzel. Not all the stories got put up on the website for various reasons of confidentiality. But you might be interested, there's 3 stories there that are to do with water, one by Luke Whaley, one by Tevengwa Chitata from Zimbabwe, and one by me. So they might be worth looking at if you're thinking about watery stories yourself. How do I move on? Okay, so just a few things I learned. I mean, obviously I can't condense. We worked with a storyteller over a number of weeks, actually, and in terms of developing our stories and practicing them to each other and refining them and so on. But just a few tips I learned in the process was this idea that stories are really excellent for engagement, because culturally, conversationally, we privilege storytelling. Stories work in a number of different cultures. And one of the key things about stories is people remember stories if they had some emotional connection, if the stories made them feel something. So if we're looking at engagement, that's a really probably quite a good way of doing it. Stories are really good for sharing our own values. Like we can offer people our own values and judgments, if you like, in the story without necessarily making that explicit. But we can also convey interest and curiosity and so on. And perhaps the most important point for me, and what I learned from doing this storytelling process, was the reflection involved and the work of storytelling. You know, we think, I'm sure all of you can immediately come up with stories from your research, multiple little scenarios and anecdotes and things you really want to tell. But to craft that into something accessible, and in our case short, because we were aiming for about 10 to 12 minutes of performance, involves quite a bit of stepping back, gaining perspective, working out how that story would be seen by others, and lots and lots of selection. So through the process, through the weeks we worked on stories, a lot of that was about making them less complicated and refining them and selecting the key themes or the key things that we wanted to talk about there. I think that's a really nice thing to do, because obviously in our research, in writing up our research, in writing theses and dissertations and academic papers, we have to do all this. It's just more fun doing it in a storytelling way. One of the things I haven't written on there, but which was feedback from all the people who took part in it, was we all felt quite liberated by the storytelling format and realised what a tyranny academic writing is, and the academic style, and having to, you know, frame things in terms of a body of literature and a body of knowledge and our original contribution to it and referencing and so on. Whereas this was very liberating, like we could say what we wanted to say and we didn't have to do all that arduous work of making it academic. So I'd say that's a really big value of storytelling. We gained a lot of energy from that aspect of it. Okay, when we started off, the storyteller gave us some permissions, and I think this is a really interesting thing to think about in terms of social science as well. The first one was that you exist, and that's a good thing. Your own experience is interesting and accessible to your listeners. So it's all about that, you know, our subjectivity in research and not trying to necessarily offer the expert view or the overall conclusive judgment about something, but actually presenting the story as our own story as well, not just the story about water or tourism or whatever it is. So again, that was quite affirming, particularly for the PhD students who was like struggling with their writing and so on, to privilege their own experience. And the point the storyteller made was that it's your own experience, your human experience, that makes these stories more accessible to your listeners. He said it's okay to present a single point of view, your point of view. You don't have to be comprehensive. You don't have to reflect everybody's voices or perspectives. You can if you want to, but it becomes quite complicated in the storytelling format. And it's okay to be very selective about what it is you want your listeners to take away. So he was trying to encourage us to think it's not the one story for all time, you know, it's like a story about an aspect or some linked aspects of your work. So yes, be comfortable with that. Yeah, and then citations are not needed. We're listening to you and you already have the authority to speak. So there's no authority in a story other than your own, or maybe the people you're talking about or whose stories you're also relaying there. So just to sort of pause before I go on to crafting a story, did you have a chance to look at Itzel's story about tourism in development? You have seen it, okay. Yes. Great. So just quickly, I'd be really interested to know what you thought about that. Like, did you think it was engaging, and what did you notice about the storytelling style? If people can speak out, that's great, or if you want to, I don't know, post in chat, also great. Things, you know, she talks about the changing details of Cancun and so on, but she also incorporates bits of the Mayan language. So she's kind of showing respect for the people she works with, and she's not trying to tell their story for them, but she's trying to show respect by showing bits of their language and so on. She uses humour as well, and she sort of pokes fun at herself a bit, and that's always very good to get the audience going. She chooses her language quite carefully. So at some point she's talking about the howler monkeys as her neighbours, and just that choice of language, that choice of words, you know, shows her connected in that world and connected to the physical world and the animals and the people and so on. So there's a lot about, she does quite a lot to establish her connections with local people, local researchers, the animals, the environment and so on. And she's quite well tailored this to the public audience, but she's also talked a bit to us as an academic audience. So at some point she says something like, I'm a geek, so I did a PhD. Well, that goes down very well with an academic audience. So you've got to have a think about which little bits of jokes or asides might appeal to your audience, or even to different people in the audience. Yeah, so to talk a bit more about crafting the story. So this is what we were taught about. Obviously, you've got to choose your theme and what the purpose of your story is, who you want to talk to, and really what the main things are that you want to convey. And then obviously you've got to structure it. How can my examples, asides, chosen details, style and structure resonate with what my story is about? So think very carefully about how much detail, how many sub-stories, how many asides and so on you put into it. And if you're making these asides or little by the way stories along the way, you need to find a way to weave them back into the story. We were taught about having a conscious structure, like looking for opportunities for foreshadowing. And foreshadowing is kind of having a little scenario or incident or something you say that actually foreshadows the theme of the whole story, but people don't know it yet necessarily. They don't really know why it's going to be important, but it then allows you to come back to that theme at the end. Like I think with my story, I start with thinking about rice just as a way of entering into this whole area of water, land governance and so on. And then at the end, I come back to rice. And, you know, you can have this structure where you move through these different themes, but you come back in a circle to the beginning. Some people, if you look at the stories that are online, like Judith Krause's story, have quite complicated interwoven narratives, but then she makes those different narratives. They're about different scenarios from her work, different subjects of her work. But then the theme is connections. So she quite cleverly brings together these quite different scenarios, but the theme is connection. So we're left making the connections between them and the interwoven narratives. And then we were taught about an emotional arc to the story. And an emotional arc is, you know, you can start quite low key, or you can start with a joke, you can build up, you can give people something exciting, or you can convey your own emotional journey and so on, but that you don't want to keep it all on the same even keel of emotion. There should be some kind of varying emotion because that boosts engagement. This really made me think about my own teaching and how little we do varying emotions, for example, in our teaching, and how boring it must be for the students. But so the audience often infers meaning from how stories make us feel. So think about the emotions you want to bring in. Obviously, if you're using humour, that's fine, but constant jokes throughout will get a bit tedious and boring. So, you know, then intersperse the jokes with the serious, more serious or points, or the more kind of sensitive things. So that was something to really think about there.